Week 7 of the 2024 NFL season is a critical defining moment for the 2024 Miami Dolphins one way or another. We're exploring that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft Lead for the 33rd team. You can find all of our shows here on the Locked On Network on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Tip of the cap to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. I am not home for those of you watching on YouTube, but I am dialed in for week 7 because we're off the heels of watching Aaron Rodgers and the Jets for the third straight week fail to come up with a game-winning drive in critical time to push the Jets below the Dolphins in the standings. When Jets fans told us all they needed was Aaron Rodgers, and this team would be great. Well, one team through 6 weeks hasn't had their starting quarterback for all but a game and a half and has a better record than the team that does. So it's the AFC East rivalries seeping through here a little bit as I'm smiling here with the Dolphins coming off of a stress-free bye week. The Dolphins have their own problems, of course, and week 7 has the opportunity to be, in my mind, a critical pivot point one way or another for this season. It can go good, it can go bad. And coming out of the bye week with extra time to prepare and reacclimate and reassess and look at your issues and choose how to attack them, and probably your quarterback 1 week away from coming back, and he clearly masks a number of issues that exist within the offense, but you need to trust that quarterback to make the right decisions to keep himself healthy. So it's a really messy spot the Dolphins find themselves in. But the AFC landscape is itself messy. I think that's the first place that my mind goes. And I'm going to get into this show about how the way that this script can go for Miami and do so in a favorable fashion when you consider the Dolphins and their schedule and the AFC playoff picture and the conference as a whole. This isn't meant to gloss over the fact that like the Dolphins have a number of core fundamental issues that need to be resolved or are problem points and have been for multiple years. That is a great cause for concern. But when you came into this season, you knew the expectation was you were going to compete for a playoff spot and potentially break the playoff win drought, which is a drought that's old enough to drink. And it makes those of us who are old enough want to drink when we think about it. But it's not meant to ignore the issues the Dolphins have. And the Dolphins are coming off of a win against New England. That was an ugly win, but a win that showed at least some self-awareness of what the team is right now. And I think there's something there to build upon, because when I look at this football team, and I said this on the Joe Rose show this morning with Joe Rose on WQAM, there's so much room for better impact from the players who are your needle-moving players on this roster, that if the bye week affords you an opportunity to figure out how is it not pulling teeth without your starting quarterback to get your Pro Bowl caliber and all-pro wide receiver who was ranked as the number 1 player in the entire the NFL above 40 receiving yards. Like, it shouldn't be that hard. It has been. And I thought it was interesting. Mike McDaniel, in talking yesterday, talked about Tyler Huntley and the work that he wanted to do in the bye week was really rooted in he hadn't really operated the no-hitch in-breaking routes that are a staple of creating explosive plays within this offense before. And I kind of poked at it yesterday about, if that's the case, calling in-breaking no-hitch routes is a whole other conversation. But can Tyler Huntley for a game, really, this is the question, help create some explosive plays in the passing game, because I think you are going to need some explosives to win this game against the Colts. We'll get all week long into the matchups individually with Indianapolis and Miami, and I think Miami is going to struggle to match up with what the Colts can bring on the offensive line, particularly when they run the ball, unless the Dolphins say, we're coming off the bye, to heck with the snap rotation. Calais, Zach, you guys are our 2 interior defensive linemen. You're not leaving the field. We're going to figure out who the 3rd interior guy who is going to play at a high level, because somebody seems to be able to play sufficient level football in any given week. But the depth of that room as a whole, it's on average 2 out of the 3 struggle between Brandon Peely and Deshaun Hand and Benito Jones. Who's the guy who's locked in this week? And let's get him on the field to kind of congest some running lanes. And it sounds like the Dolphins are going to get Anthony Richardson. If you can create some explosive plays, I think this Colts defense, you should be able to run the ball on them. Their run defense this year has been a great pain point for them. So if you're able to do that, you can create a few explosive plays. There's a script for the Dolphins to win this football game, and you would wake up in that version of reality with the Dolphins at 3-3 and probably looking at getting Tua Tagovailoa back against the Arizona Cardinals. And at that point, you reset and you say, it's an 11-game season. What can you do with it? And I think that's where it gets really interesting, because as you look at the AFC conference and what it was supposed to be versus what it is, those are 2 very different things through the first half of October and all of September. And that's what we're going to be looking at next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins, exactly how the conference is not what we expected and how this team is not what we expected as well, but how those things can coexist in a world in which the Dolphins can still achieve some of the big picture goals that a lot of fans thought that they had. We're going to get into that next. Make sure you stick with us here on Locked On Dolphins. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Over at FanDuel right now, the Dolphins are 3.5-point underdogs as things currently stand going into Week 7 against the Colts. You typically get 3 points for being on the road. So as far as like the nature and dynamics of both teams, the sports books and the odds right now kind of favor these 2 teams similarly, but the Colts do have a home field advantage. If you think the Dolphins are going to win this game, you can get the money line at plus 156. I don't think that's a bad potential odd. And you can also buy the spread up or down as well. You could get the Dolphins and buy it down to plus 1.5 if you or just buy it down below 3.5 if you think that the Dolphins are going to keep this thing within 3 points. You can buy it down and get still comparable odds, plus 124 for plus 2.5, plus 142 for plus 1.5. So you have some strategy with how you want to choose to attack over at FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Make sure you visit. Again, get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. PrizePicks is the most fun way to stay involved with daily fantasy sports. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks over on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and does not return, PrizePicks keeps your lineup live. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. Go to PrizePicks. You can download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play $5. You don't even need to win to get the $50. PrizePicks, run your game. So the AFC landscape, as things currently stand, there's a bunch of teams that have a bunch of issues. I would not dismiss. I think there's probably a separation of the top 4 teams. It's Kansas City, who sits at 5-0. It's the Texans, who sit at 5-1. The Baltimore Ravens at 4-2, and their losses, they lost the fluke game of all fluke games at home against the Raiders in week 2, and they lost to the Chiefs in week 1. And this team has really found their stride. They're scoring a lot of points, are running the ball And then Buffalo, who now sits at 4-2 and owns head-to-head victories over both the Dolphins and the Jets in the AFC East. So I don't think anybody would have been surprised if you told them that was the upfront dynamic for the AFC conference. But after that, you have the Pittsburgh Steelers at 4-2. They are currently the 5 seed. They're playing good defense, but the quarterback play between Russell Wilson, who has not played this season, and Justin Fields, the limitations that exist there. That's a team that any given week, you really don't know what you're going to get offensively. The Chargers at 3-2 are the next team. The Chargers are a team who are really hanging their hat on running the ball, playing defense. They have played not particularly impressive teams, but that's not a thing that you can cash shade at if you're a Dolphins fan, just because the Dolphins' 2 wins are against a winless or a 1-5 Jacksonville team and a Patriots team that currently has the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. But the Chargers wins have come against the Raiders, the Panthers, and the Broncos. And the Broncos, I think, managed to scratch out 15 passing yards in the first half against the Chargers. And speaking of the Broncos, they are the AFC's 8 seed as things currently stand. The Dolphins are the 9 seed. And the only team between the Steelers and the Chargers as the 5 and 6, the Broncos and Dolphins as the 8 and 9 seeds, is the team that the Dolphins play on Sunday in Week 7, the Indianapolis Colts at 3-3. And they have their own quarterback issues with Anthony Richardson probably coming back. It sounds like he will be back and as the starter in this game as a player who has not played a lot of football, a high variance player. That was another point that I made on the Joe Rowe show this morning is, you think about the Dolphins and their loss to Tennessee. The worst possible thing that could have happened in that game was a high variance starter in Will Levis going out in favor of an experienced backup with a low ceiling, but a guy who's not going to shoot himself in the foot running the offense in Mason Rudolph. I kind of look at the dynamics of what the Colts bring with Joe Flacco. I think Flacco has a much higher ceiling than Mason Rudolph does at this stage, but it's kind of the same thing. If you're a Dolphins fan, I probably am hoping to see Anthony Richardson just because the variance in the passing game, if you can clog and congest enough of the running games for the organic run game, you do have the defensive backs who I think can play some matchups between Ramsey and Kendall Fuller and Caterco, who's been better this year as an outside corner against the Colts. Have a big player in Michael Pierce who wins down the field. He's averaging an outrageous yards per catch average as a vertical receiver this year. And Richardson obviously has the arm to unleash him. But then Michael Pittman, who's playing through a back injury. Those are kind of the guys I think you could play some matchups with and force tight window throws. And that gets into the script for how the Dolphins win this football game. Again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the Dolphins don't have a litany of issues to work out. But the Broncos, who are in front of the Dolphins, Bo Nix has had 2 games this season with less than 50 yards passing in the first half. And almost all of his production came in the fourth quarter against the Chargers in a game that the Chargers were up 23-0. And the Broncos scored 16 points in the fourth quarter to make it a 1-score game. They have issues. The Colts have issues with what are you doing with Anthony Richardson? The run defense has been awful for them. The Chargers, what's the ceiling with the pass catchers? What's the ceiling with the defense? Their defense has showed up in big spots against bad offenses. Pittsburgh, their offensive play and reliability at the quarterback position. What does it look like on a week-to-week basis? I think Pittsburgh has a pretty high floor, and I think their schedule's pretty favorable for them to be 4-2 at this stage. They look pretty good. But we've been so in the bubble of how bad Miami has been relative to expectations that I think it's a little easy to overlook this conference as a whole. And I'm not trying to sit here and sell you false hope or anything. The Dolphins are a flawed football team. They're going to win the Super Bowl this year. I'm pretty confident in telling you they're not going to win the Super Bowl this year. But if the bye week becomes a recalibration of the right kinds of things, and I think there's things that we as Dolphins fans are going to have to unfortunately accept with this tenure of brain trust running this football team and this head coach in place in Mike McDaniel, there's things that they do because they believe it that are going to drive us nuts, and it's going to be a limiter in what you're able to do. Can you get the things that were good about what the identity of the team has been? Can you get those pieces back? Because right now, like you don't even have remotely close to what has been like the identifying calling cards of what's been good about the Mike McDaniel era. It's been all bad, and mostly bad thus far this season. Can you flip that switch? If the answer is yes, do I think this team has the talent to make an interesting run in the back 12 games of the season? Yes, I do. But that has to start with this game. You can't lose this game and go to 2-4 and then find yourself in a position where you play Arizona, who's a tough out, and then you play Buffalo the week after that. You're looking at the first 8 games. If you lose this one, your best case scenario is 3-5. And that is probably going to be too steep of a hole to climb your way out of. But if you get to 3-3, and then you can find yourself at 4-3 if Tua comes back and you win that football game against a Cardinals team that is very young. They would have to travel, obviously, to Miami for the game. I think they're probably a year away from being more reliable as an opponent. You can joke if you'd like, but it's the Call of Duty release weekend. And if you don't know the Kyler Murray stats and splits for games in which the annual Call of Duty game comes out, that was a big part of the like stipulations in his contract extension about certain amount of time that he had to log studying because he likes the game, and it's the Call of Duty weekend. So you never know. And I'm only half kidding with that, but this can be a springboard for Miami to look more like the team that we thought. Do I expect it to happen? I really don't know what I expect to happen, but it's at least worth monitoring. Now, Mike McDaniel did give us some more on Tua Tagovailoa. We're going to talk about that next year on this episode of Locked on Dolphins, so make sure that you stick with us. If you're spontaneously trying to go to Lucas Oil this weekend to see the Dolphins play the Colts, or if you want to go see the Dolphins play Arizona the following week and potentially be there for the return, the hypothetical return still at this stage, but it's at least feeling like it's trending that way a little bit for Tua Tagovailoa. You can get your tickets through Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. All of your favorite concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They give you panoramic views from your seats, so there's no surprises for the sight lines. You can toggle in all-in pricing, so there's no surprise fees when you put the tickets into your cart and go to check out. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Get those tickets delivered directly to your phone with just a few taps. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. It may be game time for Tua Tagovailoa sooner rather than later, which I hope everyone, regardless of what you feel about Tua, has a little bit better appreciation for Tua. The quarterback, there's still dynamics here to drive you crazy about him and his play. And, of course, the long-term picture there with his decision-making and trusting him to protect himself is a very difficult and challenging conversation to have as far as the dynamics of now seeing what it looks like without him in year 3 of the Mike McDaniel offense. Not that it looked great in week 1. It certainly didn't look great in the first half against Buffalo or the first 3 quarters against Buffalo either. But you'd like to think that everybody playing together for the past month, you've kind of got a better understanding of how to put your players in better positions to be successful, and having your starting quarterback goes a long way in doing that because of the core principles of the offense and how it's been built. Mike did say the Dolphins, Mike was the first Dolphins official yesterday to say that he expects Tua Tagovailoa to play again this season. Adam Schefter, in his weekend roundup, talked about how he expects to see Tua back sooner rather than later. There was supposed to be over the bye week a bit of a ramp-up period as far as increasing in his state in concussion protocol, increasing the intensity of what he's doing, to see if there's any negative feedback on that. It does not sound like there's been any setbacks with his process, which, again, he's eligible to come off of injured reserve a week from yesterday. So we're within a week of Tua being eligible of being activated. And if the Dolphins indeed do that, we know what time it is. It's game time for Tua, and it's time for this Dolphins offense to start to look like the Dolphins offense that it's capable of being, with two really talented wide receivers and the ability to run the ball and a pass game that has the quick trigger to get the ball out and negate opposing pass rushes. That really hasn't existed. Tyler Huntley's average time to throw is about a half a second longer than Tua Tagovailoa's typical game in his second start in the game against New England. So it is really difficult to kind of unravel all of the variables at play. But I think one thing is for certain: this is a Dolphins offense that will be better if it does have Tua Tagovailoa back behind center. Our hope is we can get that sooner rather than later, so we can have the best chance of watching enjoyable Dolphins football. It doesn't guarantee that it's going to be enjoyable Dolphins football, but it gives you the best chance of being able to enjoy the games. And for this season, in which there's a lot of teams that are not what they were expected or looked or appeared to be, the Dolphins are in that club. But the point of this show, and the point that I hope you take away from this show, is there's a lot of teams in the AFC that are like that as well, including the team that we dunked on at the very top of the show, the New York Jets, who had the best defense in the NFL and then got Aaron Rodgers. And they're sitting at 2-4 this morning after a loss to Buffalo that included a lot of self-inflicted mistakes. I know the officiating was an element there, but they're a team that has already shown signs of desperation as they've been kicking the tires on Davante Adams, and they've already fired their head coach, Robert Saleh. This AFC conference is a tier of haves and have-nots, and I think Kansas City, Baltimore, Houston, and Buffalo right now, if you're really good about those teams' odds to make the postseason and be in position to maybe make a run. Who can get hot outside of that? The Dolphins are in the club. Gives you a puncher's chance. We'll continue to set the table with the Colts the rest of the week here on Locked On Dolphins. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Make it a great rest of your day. Appreciate you guys checking out the show. Talk to y'all again soon.